Hello, everyone. It's always underwhelming to have in a place of 3,000 people a microphone and 200. Hi, everybody. Thanks for staying here. Hopefully, everybody stayed here because they want to be here and not just because they stayed here. But this session is about global customer success. So stories of global customer success, and we're going to have a very creative session that is actually a Never Have I Ever game, the first ever Never Have I Ever game in customer success. And we have 4 customer success leaders to be here with me. My name is Omer, by the way. I'm a regional director with Gainsight. So let me introduce the members of the panel. Come in, guys. Let's see if they can walk in. Please join me here. There we go. Thank you. Yeah, we can do that. We can do that. We're nice people here. Thank you so much. So we do have chairs. So let me introduce the friends that we have here today. From the left, we have Chris Kristalwich. He's a vice president of worldwide customer success at eGain, where he built a global team just a few months ago with members in the US, the UK, Canada, and India. And when he's not handling escalations from global customers, he likes to watch and play hockey like a good Canadian. Next, we have Martine Niermans, who's the Chief Customer Officer at Binder, a marketing software company in Amsterdam. And before joining Binder, she was with Apple. Thank you. We have Shira Shimoni here. Shira is the head of global strategic accounts at Magento Commerce, a market leader in e-commerce. She joined the company actually 5 years ago as the first ever customer success hire in the company, and now manage the whole team, a global team that supports merchants from Sydney to New York to Kuwait. And lastly, Martine Niermans, Don Farhi, sorry for that, a global customer success leader who ran the global customer success team at MongoDB until recently. Before that, built the team at Citrix and is starting doing the same thing with BrightEdge in a few weeks. So congratulations on that. So the way that this is actually going to work right now is that we're going to play a Never Have I Ever game. I'm going to say a say, we're going to have it on the screens, and we're going to ask you at the 1, 2, 3, just raise your signs here and say guilty or no way, and we can discuss that. How does that sound? Okay. Fantastic. Okay, let's start with the first one. Never have I ever struggled to recruit and retain talent in a different country. 1, 2, 3, go. We have 2 guilty. Oh, 4 guilty. Oh my God. Well, it sounds like a challenge. Shira, how about you start and telling us what was your struggle?
So I recently had an open headcount for about 3 months for Europe, and the challenge that we had was the recruiter was based in Austin, Texas. So I don't really know what a recruiter in Austin knows about hiring in Barcelona or Dublin. I was really open to where that person sat, but I needed a French speaker in Barcelona or Dublin, which surprisingly there are a handful out there. And I really needed somebody who was independent and who could troubleshoot while I am in the US and asleep throughout most of the day because of the time difference. And I ended up hiring somebody recently who just started about a week ago, and I hired somebody with less experience, and right now I have the time to mentor that person because I have a small team. And so it's gonna work out, I'm confident, but it has been a struggle.
And how much time did it actually take to recruit this person compared to somebody that you hire in, LA or San Francisco, where your company is based?
It took 3 months for me to hire.
For the position?
Yeah.
Wow. Martine.
Yes. We're actually an Amsterdam-based company with an office in Boston, London, Dubai, and Barcelona. And the biggest struggle to hire customer success managers in Europe is the fact that most people don't know what they are. You get the funniest replies to job applications from massage therapists who feel they can definitely succeed with customers to flight attendants who feel that they definitely have the success in them. So that's the struggle. So we're always looking for either account managers, people from hospitality with with like affinity for SaaS. But we're also another problem or a challenge actually, it's not a problem, is to have people bilingual. So in Europe, it's great if you speak Dutch in Amsterdam, but we prefer English. And we prefer a second language. And then Dutch, obviously, we're just a small peanut on this earth. So Dutch is not that interesting. But German or French or Spanish would be great. And to find that needle in the haystack of the combination of people who'd be perfect for customer success,
Right.
who understand what it's about, and who are bilingual or trilingual is always a huge challenge.
Wow. Chris, you filled quite a few positions in the last 7 months in 4 different continents. How did that go?
Yeah, I think definitely the same issues that we've had with recruiting and language and everything else. But I think the bigger part that we've had is when we enter in a new region that we're not in as a company, how do you even bring them on board? We have to talk about whether or not we bring them in through an agency. How do we even pay them? Taxes, commission, everything else. It's a lot different. Recently just trying to figure out where to put that person for cultural reasons is a big thing, especially in APAC. A lot of the countries, they don't work well with others, and it's trying to find a right cultural fit and a location-wise that you don't have someone in Japan that travels to Australia or vice versa. It's very difficult, and so I think the approach that we've taken is really looking at trying to find the cultural difference, put them in the right spot, and then try to find someone who's amenable to the other regions.
And we're going to talk in a second about consistency. How do you keep consistency across the team? And also at the end of the session, each one of you will share your 3 top tips to everybody in the audience about how to scale the organization and build a global customer success. But let's move to the next slide because I want to see you raising those beautiful signs again. So the next one is, never have I ever ran a customer call or escalation at an unreasonable hour. 1, 2, 3, go. Shocking, right? Okay, yeah, we have a lot of consistency in the team here. So, Dawn, how about you start? We'll start with you on this one.
Sure. So actually, just even as recent as about a month ago, we were in the middle of hiring for our Dublin office, but we were in the middle of kind of our busy season where we needed to go through pretty extensive onboarding efforts. And so we were splitting the onboarding effort for our EMEA customers with the local CSMs here in New York and Palo Alto. And it got pretty extensive, so I was even doing them as well. So we were trying to manage it on reasonable hours, but the idea is that you want to set expectations with the customers kind of up front without completely revealing your lack of certain local resources. But we were just kind of doing an all hands on deck and making sure that everybody was kind of on board, including the sales team as well.
Chris, how about yourself?
Yeah, this is far too common, I think, for most CSM teams. Really pointing towards, I think, the sales team that, they take an opportunity to sell in a region where you're not necessarily ready to support that region. And, I think the situation is, you try to support it for the best you can for a while. Hopefully, then you can start expanding into that region. And the model that I really like to do is try to put people there so we don't, expect that they do this over and over again. But yeah, it's too common right now.
And do you feel like when you actually hire for a specific location at the beginning, you're doing everything and you're trying to actually delegate people in the region? Or do you guys all keep the escalations to yourself for infinity, for all the global strategic accounts? Do you actually try to have people on the ground who eventually will manage all those escalations for you?
Yeah, I think going to see the client is the best thing that you can possibly do. Not everyone has the budget to send someone somewhere.
Right.
But, usually when you're on the phone or it's a conference call, especially if it's bad hour, even if you're making your client have the bad hour rather than you, they're not usually amenable to coming to a decision or an agreement. Sending on site, you can talk face to face. You can usually work through the problem much easier. So hopefully that resolves it.
Fantastic. Anything to add? Okay, let's move to the next one then. Never have I ever had a customer ask for us to change our onboarding process or materials to fit their unique local needs. And I'm expecting specific stories here. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay. Let's start with Martine.
Well, specific stories, not really. But so when we started out, which is not that many years ago, we first tried to conquer Holland, and then we decided we could definitely add Germany and France to it. because we're all Europeans after all. That didn't work out too well as Dutchies start selling in France and Germany. So eventually, the first thing we needed to do, well, we assumed that everybody spoke English, which most of them do, but they just don't feel comfortable. So we first needed to change everything in the local language. And eventually even we needed to hire local people who are working in our Amsterdam office because the countries really prefer to speak with locals and like natives. So we have amazing French teams and German teams. We even now have Middle East teams. Although the Middle East is a different story because the French and the Germans, for example, we have our sales manager and our solution consultant and our project manager and our customer success manager, and that group is sort of pretty self-sufficient. Right. But in the Middle East, they always expect to have a C-level or a director or VP or something to be present as well, which changed a lot for us, so we're flying over all the time. So that's pretty different.
Or you could just hire a CSM here and call them a VP.
Well, that's what we're also doing now. We're being very creative with titles.
No, absolutely. That makes total sense. Dawn, how about yourself?
Which question was this?
It was if you had a customer asking you to change the onboarding.
That's right. The onboarding threw me off. Yeah, actually, so I'd say I've experienced this kind of on two levels. One kind of at the macro level, where if you're already in an existing market, and from a CSM standpoint, you might be able to service them, but then they start having broader demands just on the maybe the way that the product is, the way that they're experiencing the product, and they want some of the product actually to be in the local language. So the responsibility for the CSM team was then to take that feedback and socialize that internally and start making that a priority more within the organization. More kind of at a specific product or customer level, recently at Mongo, we were expanding more into China more than we ever had before. And so we were just delivering our onboarding like we usually were, except that most of the people, like 99% of the customers that were literally attending those calls, didn't speak English. And so there was this major barrier where we weren't even able to successfully onboard them, which we all know is the first step to a successful relationship. So we started thinking, okay, well, how are we going to actually scale that? And so we started using local resources in APAC that could actually help us deliver. And then the next step was we were starting to think, okay, well, how do we actually change some of these materials? So it wasn't so much that the customer was demanding it, but it was if we're going to be setting them up for success, we needed to recognize what that gap was.
And you feel like, in a way, the customer success was the first to acknowledge that, and then the product team and all the centralized organization went after? Or did you feel like you had to also be the global champion for the entire organization to understand they have to have all those?
It was a little bit more of the latter. I think people kind of intellectually understood that, but until you're actually starting to execute that, there was usually the local salespeople are already kind of speaking that language, and so we were kind of that first barrier then of really recognizing, hey, this is going to be a problem that needs to be solved. Yeah.
That's useful. Perfect. Let's move on. If we're talking about challenges, that leads directly to the next one, and I'm curious to hear what you guys are saying about that. Never have I ever decided to separate from a customer because of time or cultural differences, which is a way to say never have I ever fired a customer. 1, 2, 3, go. For the first time, we actually don't have a consensus here. Okay, I want to hear everybody. So let's actually start with you, Shira, and then I really want to hear Chris, why you had a different answer there.
Sometimes I would love to fire a customer, but it's not for that reason. I would say that, I work with a client in Kuwait, and it's challenging with the time difference. It's a 10-hour time difference. I'm in Los Angeles. It's also challenging. They work Sunday to Thursday. They are not allowed to use Skype. So having calls and getting into a conference line that works for them or for me is always a challenge. One of the biggest challenges that we have is face-to-face meetings. I'm Israeli and have a U.S. I was born and raised in the States, but my U.S. passport has stamped in it that I've been to Israel, and it's not easy for me to get to Kuwait. It's the same. My manager is Israeli, so we're meeting in London next month, but it's been a challenge, and we both recognize it. Also, celebrating the Jewish holidays and the Muslim holidays, and when they're off, we're off. There are a lot of holidays in both cultures, so we don't get to talk a lot, but it has been a challenge. But we're both, we invest in the customer, they invest in us as a company, and we make it work.
And so you never actually had a decision to say, we cannot serve this customer, this is not something that we can do, let's walk away.
We're customer success. It's not an option to not service a customer. I mean, I think it's all about managing expectations. You know, going back to the other slide, I think it's the role of sales to set the expectation in the beginning. And they don't just ask about onboarding materials. They ask about support. They ask about training. They ask about making payment in another currency. So if that's set up from the beginning, they know they're working with a US company, and their documentation will be in English. They will have to pay in US dollars. And you know, we do the best that we can to accommodate support, training in other languages.
So Shira, you're saying, this is my job, we're gonna make it work, and sales were supposed to set the expectation. We all know that sometimes sales don't set the expectation. So it sounds like, Chris, you had a different experience with some of your customers.
Well,
We're putting you on the spot as the person who put
There's no in between, right? I would say that we haven't fired a client per se, but previous company, we got into a situation where we had sold into a region where we weren't ready to go into. There was issues with language. They didn't necessarily read, write English proficiently. Our platform was all built in English. They had requested us to redo it all in Japanese. And quite honestly, as things progress, that was the major problem moving forward. So I could blame sales for making the wrong intro into that company and setting wrong expectations. But we tried to work with them, but we mutually agreed that it wasn't going to work, and we parted ways because we just couldn't support them. But I would agree in most cases, as customer success, you're trying to get in there, make things right, and move in direction that ultimately there's consensus and you're getting back to a level playing ground. But in some cases, you have to say that this is not going to work.
Don, Martin, anything from your end? Any specific stories that you have or thoughts about customers that were really pushing it?
Well, we did have a French customer who we first thought if we sold in France, even though with a French sales guy, and then we can do the onboarding in English. And then we sat at the kickoff in France, and apparently they only spoke French. And they had very different expectations because the French sales guy, who's not working with us anymore, didn't quite get the product yet because we onboarded him too fast. So we just found out they had completely different expectations we could never fulfill. So we pretty quickly said, that was one of our low lights. A couple of years ago, luckily, we said goodbye to them.
Okay. How about yourself? Nothing specifically? Okay. Let's move on to the next say that we have here. And again, we're going to come back after that to specific tips about how to support all of those. Never have I ever struggled to reach consistency across a global team managing a global portfolio. And again, we spoke about recruiting people all over the world. We spoke about empowering them to be a VP in the Middle East. How do you actually reach consistency of everybody together? 1, 2, 3. Ooh.
Oh, struggle. Yes. I wish.
I almost, yeah, okay. That's fine, that's fine. But we're going to start with you as a punishment here.
Okay.
So how exactly did you struggle with that, and how did you solve it specifically?
So I think I've had a few experiences with this, and I think it's different. I've been at 2 organizations, like one that had a really established customer success team and one where I was building it most recently at Mongo. And I think there's the consistency isn't just with serving the customers. I think that at this point in a lot of our organizations, we know that there's different cultural differences in the way that our customers will operate. But it's more understanding what maybe are their engagement patterns. So not all culturals want to speak to customer success managers as often, or it's a little bit more common to maybe talk about the renewal further into the relationship. So just kind of understanding some of those engagement patterns are important. But then also the consistency, I think, for me was understanding the cultural differences even internally within the organization. So a lot of times when you're working with a global team, for us, example, at Mongo, the Dublin office, all the support people were right there, all the sales people were right there. And so it was a more intimate setting. And so people kind of had these informal relationships and would maybe kind of do things a little bit more on the side that maybe weren't part of the core job description, so to speak. And so
Right.
kind of adapting to that and making sure that you understand both your cultural differences with your customers, but then also just even internally helps to build the team. Yeah.
And did you guys build any specific cadence about bringing all the team together? How did you do the meetings? How did that work? Did you optimize and paid for all the expenses in order to have once a year, once a quarter, everybody on the same spot? Or did you do it with video conference? That's actually something that, to all of you, what is the cadence that you build, for example, for your
Sure.
team?
Well, I came from Citrix, which did go to meetings, so we were pretty adapted with doing videos. But having said that, we also knew that it was really important to bring people together. So we actually brought people together globally about pretty much every year, with few exceptions to that, to build that establishment.
How about you guys?
We're probably together about 2-3 times a year. I do a lot of traveling to Europe, so we meet over there. But we do our calls in the morning, evenings. It's hard, but it's important to make the remote teams feel like they're a part of the organization. I think that's a big challenge that we have.
How about yourself, Martine?
Yeah, I totally agree. At Binder, I still struggle with it every day. I'm sure my CSMs are nodding right now. We do have meetings. We're actually having our very first Binder Summit in October, where we'll get everybody together. We have monthly meetings, usually through call-in and Google Hangouts, and just try to sort of keep the storytelling and the company culture going. We're especially focusing on storytelling. A lot of product managers or development, for example, in Barcelona, don't know why they're changing stuff. They don't know the customer stories. They don't know the internal stories at our headquarters, where all the marketing, the sales, or lots of sales anyways, and the onboarding is taking place. So we're learning every day, obviously, but it's going much better. What else? Oh yeah, what I would like to say is, in order to reach that consistency as well, is just make sure, as you said before as well, just travel to the offices. I do a lot of traveling just to make sure that I'm available. I'm usually not very often available by phone, unfortunately, so the traveling is much better because then they'll get a dedicated time with me. And make sure that the customer journey beforehand is really set. Obviously, it's not black and white, but as long as you have your company culture clear and your customer journey clear, basically any country can adopt, because you can just make minor changes, but at least they know what they stand for.
Yeah. Chris, you had to onboard yourself and a team in 4 different countries in the last few months. How did that go? What's the cadence that you built there?
It's still ongoing. No, I think the big thing that really you have with across your team is you have to empower everyone to make decisions, to give them the ability to move forward without always having to ask for approval to do something. Especially when you're a remote person, you're on a desert island. You're by yourself. Even worse is when you're one person with no support around you, so you can even get stuff done. So, creating playbooks, just overall, understanding of where the company is. I think it's really important to have team meetings, because the people that are the furthest away always don't hear what's going on at headquarters. That message takes a long time to disseminate out to the rest of the crowd. So, very important for that.
So communication. Fantastic. Well, now we actually, as part of our commitment to actually have very tangible to-do stuff, we ask each one of you to come up with your top 3 tips after building a global CS organization, and actually share with everybody here the top 3 things that you would like somebody to tell you before, the first time that you build a team like that. So we're going to start with Martine. What's your top 3? And
I'm so glad it's over here, because I forgot mine. Well, like I mentioned, establish a customer journey. Just make sure that you've mapped everything out. How would you like your customer to experience your service, your portal, and everything around it? And then, as long as you've got that set, then you can really easily multiply it in different countries, because at least they have they can hold on to something like valuable. Another thing is to hire local and visit frequently, but definitely also empower them, like you said as well, Chris. No matter what the culture, it's just important that I think just hire and local visit frequently. And the last one is staff your teams with the local country. It's just to make sure that you work with the teams, you empower them. What we found is that often in the in certain countries, if you're not native, you still miss so much detail. Even though you speak fluent English or fluent French, still compared to the native French, you just sort of miss the either small culture or detail, and that can be super offending. So just always try to hire natives and local.
Fantastic. Moving on to Chris.
So the first one I put was the cultural language and time zone differences. I think, some companies that are, much bigger, you have the budgets to go out and hire and build this kind of regional team. But ultimately, for a few of the companies I worked in the past, we didn't have those budgets right off the bat. So, an example I had was we had a lot of clients in China, a lot of clients in Japan, and we're trying to service them from North America. So as much as the CSMs would step up to the plate and have the 1 a.m. calls and 3 a.m. calls, and you can't consistently do that over time. So effectively in that situation, we found that not hiring someone in China would work because they don't necessarily work well in Japan and vice versa, very different culture. But we found someone in Taiwan that can handle both, and they're considered kind of a neutral situation as far as working with that. So it's really important to staff accordingly with that.
May I stop you for a second and ask, how did you guys actually do a recruiting in Taiwan? I mean, how do you, from your office, look at Asia and say, this country can serve these two, and then go around and hire this person?
It was covered earlier. The recruiting for this company was based in Romania. So it was, not only did no one in China or Japan or even Taiwan even know what a CSM was, so we were trying to explain it, but we were also trying to pull from people from the industry. And it was not there at all. So it took a while. We found a very good recruiting firm. We had to outsource this, and they were able to find candidates extremely quickly once we had it nailed down what we were looking for.
Did you all, by the way, use agencies? Sorry to stop you in
Yep.
the middle of your three, but did you all use agencies when you went abroad to try and recruit one-offs in different continents?
Internal.
All internal?
Internal, but I gave them a deadline. If they didn't give me good candidates by a certain time, then we were going to an agency.
Okay. How about yourself?
We do it ourselves. We have this software, and we use LinkedIn a lot, and just Skype.
And if you had to do it again, all four of you, would you do the same thing, or would you go to an agency to try and recruit people outside?
You do the same thing. It's still, recruiting through Skype is super difficult because you don't get the actual feeling with people. So we've learned our lessons. But I'd still, especially because the function is so new, I still prefer and I have the vision, so I still prefer to meet them myself. And so far we've used one time a recruiting agency, and we weren't too happy because they didn't quite understand what we were looking for either.
Shira, Don?
I'll give them a chance again.
Okay. And Don, you...
Yeah, we used our internal recruiter. We did all the interviewing, but they were the ones that kind of sourced our candidates. And we did spend, because customer success is still new to a lot of other functions, we did spend pretty extensive time understanding what the profile of the candidates were, and that was a big review session. We didn't just throw it over the wall and create a job description.
Yeah.
So they were really good at being kind of consultative, but it was a struggle at first.
Chris, I assume that if you went through an agency, you didn't get massage therapist like Martine, but would you have done the same thing again?
Well, I'll answer my third point here, because this is, so with my last company and the company that I'm with right now, with eGain, we're not looking for people that have customer success as their title. We're not looking to poach from our competitors. Ultimately, I'm looking for people that have industry knowledge, because we work with the Fortune 250. And for us to go in and tell them to digitally transform their business, and this is where we're going, and your last position was at Starbucks, you have no credibility. So we've spent a lot of effort going after very specific candidates, and most of them are passive. So the recruiting companies that we've used have extensive knowledge of what we're going after, and this is an easy find. So I'm 100%, towards that, because the last firm that we used was 11 for 11 of hiring our people. So
Wow.
It was very good use.
Let's go back to 2 and 3.
Sure. And the second one, really, with most of the teams, when we ramp things up very quickly, you kind of have to, when I came into eGain, it was, right away, you got to get it into all these clients, and there was a panic to segment our clients. which we did, by ARR. It was the simplest way to do, and then we kind of looked regionally, so we split the teams between North America and EMEA. But now we're getting to a lot more understand about, there's certain clients that only use maybe one of our products, so there's a lot of potential upside, and they need someone who is, a bit more experienced, or even verticals that are coming into play. So when you're segmenting your clients, it's very important to write it. I used to hate every year Salesforce would give me a call, and it was the breakup call. It happened at the exact same month every year that my CSM was always successful, so they moved up. And whenever they moved up, I got the call to say, you're not good enough for this person anymore, and they moved on. And we never want to have that conversation. So when we move a client from one segment to another, we want it to be because we see potential and we're moving them to someone who's going to give them even more value.
And then Leslie, can you elaborate what exactly is the clone of your best client?
That's what I mean. Like we would ultimately hire where we'd poach our best client, our interface with them, because they would ultimately make a great CSM. They can empathize. They know exactly what's going on in the industry. They can talk the talk. But if we took that's our champion at the company.
Right.
So that's the model we're looking for, is that person somewhere else.
Fantastic. Okay, moving on to Shira, your top 3 tips.
I'll go through it really quickly because we're almost out of time, and I know we want time for questions, and I already went through most of them. But manage expectations with the team. Really simple. Just need to set the expectation early on that sometimes the US team will have to do early morning calls, the EMEA team will have to stay later. Really, if I love the no surprises kind of philosophy. Manage expectations in my personal life, professional life is what works. Finding the right talent, I think this is the most important aspect, is hiring the right person to serve the needs of the local regions. Need somebody who can be independent. I would also say, when I made this hire, I hired person that I liked. I can teach them about software. I could teach them about the industry. But who do we travel a lot. Who do I want to spend my time on the road with? Who's likable? Who will the client like and build trust and build a relationship with? And lastly is the team building. You have these CSMs by themselves in different parts of the world, and for them to feel a part of the company and a part of the culture is a challenge, and it takes real effort, especially I think when we're saying communication. People find out in other parts like, oh, I didn't know that's our new policy. I didn't know that we're selling this product now, or I didn't know that person left. So I think it requires effort.
Fantastic. Leslie, before we open it to 2 quick questions, Dawn.
I have the first one as establishing a customer success philosophy. This is kind of an increasing theme as we've seen over Gainsight the last few years. Even just as of a couple years ago, customer success was really just owned just by our function. But really driving and socializing a customer success philosophy across the organization is really critical, because it can't just be one team or one function owning it. For metrics, just making sure that the team and individuals have clear metrics that are aligned with other functions, and I specifically put primarily sales, obviously, because of the upsells and renewals. This is also becoming a little bit more common, but you don't want to take it for granted and just assume that those are established. So that should be something that is worked on together with those functional leaders. And then for proactive efforts, really has to do with segmentation. So Chris mentioned it as well, and it was talked about a little bit on the stage yesterday that not all customers are created equal. So I know that even though we have the customer success hat and we always want all customers to be treated well, there are certain places that you need to make more investments in time. And so even if you only have a team of 1 or 2 customer success managers, really try to set aside certain parts of your day or week that CSM or 1 or 2 can at least be doing some proactive effort. So at least start very, very early in the team and the organization of segmenting customers so that you can really start prioritizing, and there won't be major surprises when you have any large customers that need a little bit more attention. So specifically, don't let just squeaky wheels get the grease, because usually those are sometimes, but very often those are the lower paying customers, and it's easy to get your time sucked with those. So
And that's part of the segmentation as well that you, Chris, said. Understand exactly where you want to put your effort. So thanks, everybody. We actually don't have a lot of time for questions, it seems, but I encourage all of you to download those tips because we have them online. Hopefully, you guys can stay here a few minutes and answer any questions that come from the audience about customer success, and we can keep this conversation going. Thanks again to all our 4 panelists that came from all places on the world. And thanks again. See you all.